Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined once again by a very awesome and special guest, and that is Dr. Woudhuizen. Dr. Woudhuizen, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Many of you, if you have seen his previous talk on our channel, I highly recommend doing so again. It's really fantastic. And honestly, he did such an excellent job that at this point, we've got over 73,000 views on that episode. And that's just a testament to how awesome he is and how great of an insight he can give us when it comes to the study of the history that we all love. And we've got an awesome episode coming, but before we get started, for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Woudhuizen, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you do it?
Well, I did a dissertation on the Sea Peoples. We talked about that the last time. It was in 2006 that I had my dissertation. I'm specialized in Luwian. So I do a lot of Luwian hieroglyphic and connected things. And I also did Indo European, what we are talking about today. I had a book about it, about Indo Europeanization in the Mediterranean. So I focus on the Mediterranean region. And well, I did also a little bit Semitic for the Biblos script. And for the Sea Peoples, I also studied Egyptian hieroglyphic texts. So I'm a little bit all-round Mediterranean.
Nothing wrong with that. And also, before we get started, to my subscribers, check out the links in the video description below. It's going to take you to his works, his accessible information on academia, and really just take advantage of all the awesome things he has to offer. He does some wonderfully awesome stuff, and I really can't recommend it enough. And now, our special topic today is going to be the Indo-Europeanization of the ancient Mediterranean that he's actually just briefly mentioned. And I've got a long list of questions we're going to go through, and hopefully it's going to give you an entire picture of one of the most fascinating subjects and time periods in our history. And as we get started, Dr. Woudhuizen, would you walk us through the etymological history of the term Indo-European?
Well, Indo-European has been around for some time. We have Jones, who was a judge in India when the British ruled there, and he saw a lot of similarities between the Sanskrit language and Greek and Latin. So, for example, pater, father, pitar in Sanskrit. So this is there are a lot of them, and so he saw that it is in fact one language group, and this is the largest language group in the world at the moment, because so many people talk English, which is also part of Indo-European, but German. The Germans, by the way, say Indo-Germanisch, so they have a little bit, because they think German language is the most Western and Sanskrit the most Eastern. Well, we also have Tocharian, which is even more Eastern than India. It's in the Tarim Basin on the borderland with China. So it's a little bit difficult, but we are used to Indo-European, which is the most common term. We also have the Journal of Indo-European Studies in America, so that's the term to use, I think.
And where did these Indo-European migrations come from? I guess really what I'm asking is, in the end, where did your Indo-Europeans come from originally?
Well, there has been a long discussion lately between Colin Renfrew and Maria Gimbutas and Jim Mallory and David Anthony. And Colin Renfrew said they they are coming from Anatolia during the Neolithic Revolution. They spread the Neolithic Revolution into Europe, and this would be 6th millennium BC. That's very early. And the Gimbutas, adherents of Gimbutas theory, said no, it's from the steppe in North Pontic, North Caspian region. And it's from the 4th, 3rd millennium BC onwards. And these are people with horses and with cars. And so this is a little bit later than the Neolithic Revolution. And then they spread around in Europe.
And when it comes to the Indo-Europeans and the languages that they're going to bring with them, do we know anything about the languages that Indo-European replaces?
To be honest, no. There are theories. People think that all Europe was Basque sometime or some other non-Indo-European language, but to be frankly, we don't have any text in a language which is non-Indo-European in Europe. And Basque is of course a non-Indo-European language, but it's later that we found documents in it, and it's a small area. So it's a little bit rushed to think that all Europe was once Basque. And you have, of course, in the Caucasus also languages which are not Indo-European. But we don't have any reason to think that they spread all over Europe in the Neolithic period or something like that. So frankly, we are at a loss at the moment what was pre-Indo-European.
Now, when it comes to outside of Europe, if we're talking about Anatolia and the Mediterranean, do we know anything about possible languages there that Indo-European replaced?
Well, in Anatolia, we have, of course, Hattic, the Hattic language, which is not Indo-European. And there is Hurritic, which is also not Indo-European. So there are candidates for this. But, for example, it's not clear whether Hattic was once spoken in the whole of Anatolia, because we don't have place names all over Anatolia which can be identified as Hattic, so it's not sure what was before the Indo-European languages.
If we had to guess, when a foreign group comes in and they bring their languages and traditions and other things with them, it usually takes some time for the locals to kind of adapt that as well. Do we have any theories on how long it took for the Indo-European languages to really set in?
Well, that's a difficult question. Somehow, everywhere where the Indo-Europeans went, they planted their language. So, and we don't have evidence of the language which was spoken before that. And sometimes there's even a hiatus between the Neolithic population and the Indo-European language population. So there may have been no contact at all at those places. So,
in your work, you talk about some of the dialectical tendencies within the Indo-European. And I was hoping you could give us a little more information on that in the context of, let's say, the ancient Mediterranean.
Yeah, the Indo-European can be divided into three. The Indo-European Anatolian languages, Hittite and Luwian, are presumably split off as the first. So this is very early, and some people even say this is Indo-Hittite language group. It's not really Indo-European. Indo-European is later. And then we get the period of the old Indo-European place names and river names, which were researched by Hans Krahe. And this is all over Europe, and also in the Mediterranean you find those place names and river names. And then you get the period of the what I call the conservative Indo-European languages like Celtic and Germanic, Balto-Slavic. And after this, you get another split off of the what I call innovative languages, and that's Greek and Illyrian and Indo-Iranian and Thracian and Phrygian. And those languages are typified by the use of the augment in the conjugation of the verb. So eluon in Greek, you get the e in front, and this is typical for this latest group of Indo-European languages.
When it comes to the basis of this episode, the Indo-Europeanization of the ancient Mediterranean, I was wondering if you could expand to tell us what time period we are discussing here.
Well, it's a long process. I said Indo-Anatolian is the oldest type of language, which has the laryngeal as a chi. You know, the sound laryngeal H2 is a chi in Anatolian. This is the only language which has this still preserved. I think that Hittite, Proto-Hittite and Proto-Luwian split off already in the 4th millennium, but they stayed first in the steppe region. So the Hittites went to the Maikop region in the Caucasus, and the Proto-Luwians went to the region of Varna, and this is where you find the gold. In this early 1st millennium BC. Varna is very rich in gold, and the Maikop civilization is very rich in gold. So this was the place to be. And then from 3000 BC onwards, we see the earliest Indo-Europeanization of Europe and Anatolia by what I call the old Indo Europeans. And these are the Indo-Europeans with the river names and the place names of Hans Krahe. So this is an earliest layer. And only later on in Europe, this split off into Celtic and Germanic and Italic. And I think that, you know, it's a whole process. In 2300 BC, we get again Indo-European infiltration in the Mediterranean. And I think that's the period that Proto-Luwians and Proto-Hittites went to Anatolia. Before this, we had old Indo-Europeans in Anatolia with the horse and circular settlements and place names in ST. And in 2300 we get the earliest Hittites. You know, in Alajahuk the graves are similar to the Maikop civilization with house type of graves. And the Luwians are traceable. So the Hittites went from the east into Anatolia, and the Luwians went through from the west. And those you can trace by catacomb graves, which are also typical of the steppe. And you find them in the Mediterranean region, and in Western Anatolia you only find destructions and nothing else. So there was clearly something happening at this time. And in 2300, 2000 BC, we also have in Greece the coming of people from the north. And I think those are the Thracians and Phrygians in first instance. And they have a similar type of language with the augment as Greek. And the Greeks are themselves latecomers. They come in 1600 BC with 1650 BC with the shaft graves and the richness in the shaft graves. And you have then people who are fighting in chariots, and this is typical for the Mycenaean civilization, but this is late. You also find chariots coming into the Levant, and into Egypt with the Hyksos. This is all the same period, 17th, late 18th century, beginning of the 17th century BC. So the process of Indo-Europeanization takes a long time, and it has various layers. In all, you see the layers in Anatolia. We have Old Indo-European 3000 BC, and Hittite and Luwian 2300 BC. And in Greece we have Old Indo-European, the Pelasgians, in Greece from 3000 BC, and then we get Thracians and Phrygians in 2300 BC, and the Greeks in 1600 BC. So in Greece it's a three-level development. So it takes a long time to Indo-Europeanize there. And we see the same things happening in Italy. The Old Indo-Europeans are the Ligurians, and they are very early, from 3000 BC onwards. And we have Old Indo-Europeans in Iberia, the Lusitanians, and they are also from 3000 BC. And the Celts come into Iberia only from 1200 BC onwards, with chariots depicted on stelae. And the Italians, the Italic people, come also 1200, something like that, into Italy. So this is also late.
And when it comes to these movements, do we believe that they were small migrations that happened over time, or are we looking at much larger movements?
Well, that's a little bit a tricky point. I think, for example, in 3000 BC, we see catacomb graves in the Levant, Bab Edra, near the Red Sea. We see catacomb graves in Sicily, but this might have been small groups. For example, in the Levant, we know that the language was Semitic in the end, so they didn't leave much imprint of their language there. And in Sicily, it may have been Old Indo-Europeans, but it may have been a small group, and they must have been traveling by ship. That's the interesting thing. You can't go to Sicily without a ship. And also in Italy, we have the Rinaldone culture, where we see a grave with a horse burial. Horse is typically domesticated in the steppe region. So if you find a horse, you find the Indo-Europeans, and domesticated horse then. And in the Rinaldone culture, we find a horse burial and a wife which was killed at the same time as the burial as the male, which is typical also for the steppe, rite of sutti, they call it. And so they may also have come by sea. And you see in this period the distribution of stone menhirs with depictions of all kinds of figures, etc. With weapons. The Indo-Europeans were very fond of weapons, so they introduced the weapons in those regions.
As Indo-Europeans settled throughout the Mediterranean, do we know what impacts they had on the local cultures that they settled amongst?
Yeah, they may have been small groups, they may have been larger groups at places, but you know, the language ends up to be Indo-European, so they were dominant, and their dominance was based on the weapons they carried, and they could be very aggressive. We see destructions everywhere where they come. And so they could have wiped out the locals. There were no doubt locals, but I said before, we don't have real tangible evidence of who those locals were in the language. So That's a little bit a difficulty.
And so, as the Indo Europeans arrive throughout the Mediterranean and other places, they're not only going to bring their language, but they're going to bring writing systems. And so, how did this writing system change where they settled, and what kind of writing systems did they use?
Well, the writing comes secondarily. For example, with the Luwians, I explained that they arrived in the 23rd century BC, and then we get writing there from 2000 BC onwards. So there is 300 years without writing. So we only know from 2000 onwards that they were writing in hieroglyphics, Luwian hieroglyphic. The earliest inscription is found in Bijtse Sultan. Writing can be very late. In Italy, for example, the earliest inscriptions are from the 7th century BC, and I think the Italic people arrived in the 12th century BC, so that's also a long period without writing. So the writing is the introduction of writing is not directly connected with the arrival of Indo-Europeans. We see it later in most instances when they get into contact, for example, in Italy with the alphabet through the Greeks and Anatolian population. So that's a secondary development. The writing is still from the 9th century. They get the Phoenician alphabet. They make it partly a syllabary again, and then you get Celtiberian inscriptions.
And so we've talked about the migrations. We've talked about timelines and dates, and we've also discussed language and writing. And my next question is going to touch on religion. And so I'd like to follow up by pointing out your section in your paper called Tri-Functional Religious Ideology Among Indo-European Groups in the 3rd and 2nd Millenniums BC. Would you expand on this and kind of explain that to our subscribers?
Well, it's the idea of Dumézil, who wrote about this, that typical Indo-European is the sun god, the storm god, and the tutelary deity in this order. So you have 1, 2, 3. And you see that everywhere where the Indo-Europeans arrive. So this is very interesting. And for example, the storm god is always associated with weapons, and the tutelary deity with agriculture and animals, and the sun god, of course, with the sun. So, and you see this on statue menhirs also reflected, that you see solar symbols on top and weapons in between, and animals below. So this is the three functional idea of the Indo-Europeans in their religion.
I want to do a follow-up to that, actually, because it just popped into my head. And we talk about the three main gods of these Indo-European groups. As we know, many other groups like that, such as the Celtic-speaking peoples, by the time the Roman Empire, or Republic, let me rephrase that, by the time the Roman Republic conquers what was Celtic-speaking Gaul, at this point we know the Celts had hundreds of deities. Hundreds of them. It's like a god for everything. And so my question is, in your personal opinion, why do you think that these Indo-European groups expanded to have so many more gods than just a simple three?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. You know, the Hittites had 1,000 gods, the land of the 1,000 gods. Of course, you see always in religion, you can see sometimes the influence of people who were already there. So you get a mixture of in the religion, But even in Hittite, you see sometimes the order of sun god, storm god, tutelary deity preserved. But of course, a lot has happened, and we see Hattic influence in religious influence on the Hittites. So that certainly did happen.
And now, with the arrival of these Indo Europeans, we know obviously they brought languages with them, but now I want to shift focus and I want to talk about technology. What did the Indo Europeans bring to the playing field when it comes to material culture, weapons? We can even say, for example, horses. Could you tell us just a little bit more?
The steppe region where the earliest Indo-Europeans lived, you have a lot of horses there. So they were the first to domesticate the horse. And presumably they were also riding the horse. And if you are on a horse, you can much easier control sheep, for example, in larger numbers, and also control other horses. So this is what they did. The steppe population is a little bit more advanced than agriculture only. They had a mixed economy, and they had a lot of husbandry. So animals were very important to them, and they had sheep and goat and horses and cattle. You know, the Indo-Europeans like to fight about cattle. We know that from Homer. So to steal cattle from your opponent was the greatest deed you can do. So this is a later type of economy than just Neolithic products from agriculture. And another thing is that they are very advanced in cars. They have four-wheeled wagons, and with those wagons they can travel along larger routes and with all their belongings in the car. So the earliest Indo-Europeans into Europe take the car with them. So from 3000 BC we find car wheels in Holland, for example, and those were solid wheels. So these were heavy carts with solid wheels. And of course, the horse became more important with the later development of the spoked wheel. This is from 2000, 18th century BC. In Sintashta, we find the earliest chariots. And then you can also fight from the chariot, so you are much more mobile than other people's. So they were advanced in car technology, and of course they had a lot of weapons also. If you have cattle or sheep, you have to defend it against others. So they needed the weapons, and so they were also advanced with weapons.
And so with the arrival of horses and carts, let's talk about the chariot. When do we really see the chariot pop up, and how is the chariot going to revolutionize warfare?
Well, it did revolutionize warfare. It was first found in Sintashta. You have graves with spoked wheels. Of course, the wheels are no longer there, but they see it in the coloring of the sand and of the earth, and so they know there were chariots, and we see then from the steppe people going across the Caucasus mountains. I don't know whether they took the sea route or the land route, but they went across it. And you see then the chariot fighting introduced in the Orient, and they conquer everything. You only have to think of the Hyksos in Egypt. They take the delta in Egypt thanks to the chariots. So they were highly superior in warfare in this period compared to the people who were living in the Levant at the time. And we can even identify them as Indo-Aryans. So speaking a language closely to Sanskrit in India, because of the royal names of the Mitanni kingdom are of this Indo-Aryan type. And they have Rata, Tus Rata, you know, Rata is the chariot. So, we see them and you see them conquering the Levant in this period. Of course, these were not only the nucleus was Indo Europeans, and they become the king and the royal house of Mitanni. But the language in Mitanni kingdom is Hurritic, is not Indo European, so they took a lot of people with them of other languages. This is of course possible.
And now, since we've touched on chariots and the carts, and we're starting to talk about the horse, my next question is, when it comes to the Indo-Europeans and religion, did the horse play a prominent role within that?
Yeah, for sure. We have the Ashvamedha in India, which is a ritual with a horse, the queen copulating with the horse, which may be a ritual, not an actual fact, but still the horse was central in this religion, and the horse was allowed for a year to run freely, and then it was sacrificed, and so there was a whole ritual surrounding this. So and you find this in more Indo-European civilizations.
Interesting. Yeah, and I was going to say the horse, even in the Celtic societies, for example, played a very, very prominent role.
In Celtic, we have the horse goddess Icona or Epona. So the horse is typical, is very important, yes.
And now as we approach Indo-Europeans establishing themselves throughout the Mediterranean, what changes can we expect from this, and how will it affect the Bronze Age?
One thing which they introduced is weapons which were not there, so they were more aggressive than the local population who were Neolithic farmers and didn't specialize so much in weapons. So this is of course a fundamental change, and you see this everywhere. You know, the latest evidence about DNA, which made Colin Renfrew skip his own theory that it were Neolithic farmers who spread Indo-European languages. And now we know from the DNA that it were people from the steppes who introduced those languages. And it is even suggested that they may have taken with them the plague. So that local population in England, there is an example, and in Poland there is an example, that local population seems to disappear. They don't find them in the DNA anymore. And so there are suggestions that like the Huns, they took with them the plague, and so that the local population died out. Or you see it in South America, where the measles killed the local population. So this is certainly a possibility that they took with them a disease which they were themselves didn't have problems with. The locals were not immune, and the people who brought it were immune for the disease. This is a possibility that it happened at some places.
So what we've learned so far, to my subscribers, the Indo-Europeans not only bring their language and their cultures, they bring their own takes on religion. They bring awesome new technologies that is going to forever change the world, especially when it comes to warfare and travel. And also, they also possibly, as he touches on, brings disease, which is really interesting because, as we all know from studying the conquest of the Americas, you've got violence, which is a natural factor of conflict, but then you've got the unintentional spreading of disease. And so that's fascinating. I had not actually known that, and so this has completely blown my mind today.
Yeah, that's suggested by Reich in his book on ancient DNA. So you need the ancient DNA. You also had a lot of writing about recent DNA, and they're projected back in time, but they can have so many changes in the population can have taken place in earlier times. So you really need the ancient DNA to be able to work with this material. We had Maria Gimbutas and David Anthony, Jim Mallory saying all those people come from the steppes, but now they can prove it from the DNA. This is steppe DNA, which is introduced in Europe.
That is fascinating. I'm gonna have to look up that book. That sounds like a must-have. So I'm gonna have to.
Yes, and it's very readable. It's almost popular writing. So it's a really good book.
Interesting. And so, as we come to the final portion of our interview today, I want to ask a more personal question. And that is, how long have you studied the Indo-Europeans and everything that we've talked about today?
Well, for a long period, I had my training in Mediterranean pre- and proto-history, and my teacher was Jan Best, and he had a theory about linear A, and about the coming of the Greeks. And the coming of the Greeks was, according to him, they come from the south, because we have Danaos from Egypt and Katmos from the Levant. And so they might have been some split off of the Hyksos with chariots, the Stelae Mycene have chariots depicted on them. And so this was my introduction to Indo European, and then I started, and he told me also that, and the other students, that the Greeks were not the earliest Indo Europeans, but they were preceded by Thracians, and I would add Phrygians. Pelops is a Phrygian, and the Peloponnesos in Greece is named after Pelops, and we have Phrixos, which is the Phrygian, nothing else but the Phrygian, and we have Thracians. Also in the myth in Greek, we have Teraus in Daulis. And this is an Odrysian royal name, and the Odrysians are mentioned in the Linear B inscriptions on vases which were imported in Thebes for the hinterland. So we know the Odrysians were once in the hinterland, and they only later went to Thrace in the north. So the Phrygians and Thracians were before the Greeks, and the Greeks only came in the 16th century, 1650, 1600 BC, with the chariots, and then they introduced the Greek language, and we get Linear B with Mycenaean Greek language. So that was a starting point, and of course I did also some Celtic, and you want to know when do the Celts arrive, and I did Luwian, so you want to know when did the Luwians arrive. So this is how you get into this field. But I'm not telling very much new in I follow Gimbutas and Mallory and David Anthony in the book about the horse, the wheel, and So this is in a way this is mainstream knowledge that the Indo-Europeans came from the steppes. Most people focus on Europe, and I focus on the Mediterranean region. And the most important point is that there were more levels. So it starts 3000 BC, then we get 2300 BC, another level, and then 1600, the latest level.
And, you know, that's just another thing to my subscribers. Dr. Woudhuizen has spent his career studying the subjects that we're talking about today. And that's why I highly encourage you all to, once again, check out the links in the video description below. It's going to take you to his work and really dive in and enjoy all the awesome research that he has put together for us to better understand the subjects that we all love. And Dr. Woudhuizen, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Okay, it was a pleasure to me.